The Tolarian Empire was one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. They had conquered thousands of planets, crushed entire civilizations, and expanded without resistance. Their fleets ruled the stars, and no enemy had ever stopped them. Now a new species stood in their way. Humans. Fleetmaster Brachus, one of the highest-ranking military leaders, was not concerned. He sat before the Empress with confidence, barely able to contain his amusement. "They only have 10 supercarriers," he said. "We have more than 160. What threat could they possibly pose?" The answer came from Scoutmaster Ula, a man who had spent years gathering intelligence. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "With respect, Your Majesty, this war will not go as expected." "No," Brachus scoffed. "You're afraid of 10 ships?" Ula didn't react. He only turned toward the Empress. She had ruled for 1,000 years, overseeing countless wars. She was not quick to dismiss warnings. "Explain," she said. Ula raised his hand, and a holographic display appeared, showing the Tolarian supercarriers. These ships had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, massive, heavily armed, carrying more than 100 fighters each. They were the pride of the Empire. "This is what we call a supercarrier," Ula said, "but humans do not use the same definition." The display shifted, showing a human warship. It looked different, blocky, rugged, covered in weaponry. Brachus leaned forward, his amusement fading. "This is the UHG Cairo," Ula continued. "By our measurements, it is smaller than our supercarriers. It has similar armor, similar power, and carries almost as many fighters." Brachus waved a hand. "Then it's a fair fight. We still have the numbers." Ula stayed silent for a moment. Then he changed the display again. The screen lit up with hundreds of glowing dots. The room went silent. "Each of these dots represents a ship like the Cairo," Ula said. "There are 228 in this fleet alone." Brachus's mouth opened, but no words came out. He stared at the display, then at the Empress. She remained calm, watching the screen. "I was told humans had 10 supercarriers," she said. Ula took a breath. "They do, but these are not what they call supercarriers." The Fleetmaster's hands tightened into fists. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then what do they call these?" Ula hesitated before answering. "Light assault craft." The silence in the room felt heavier than ever. The Empress slowly turned back to the display, her claws gripping the edge of the throne. For the first time in her rule, she felt unsure. Scoutmaster Ula's words hung in the air. Light assault craft. The term made no sense to the Fleetmaster. Fleetmaster Brachus, who had been so confident just moments ago, felt his temper rise. He slammed a fist onto the table, his mandibles clicking sharply. "That is impossible. You are telling me that each of these ships is no more than a support vessel to humans? That their actual supercarriers are something even larger?" Ula did not flinch. "Yes, Fleetmaster, that is exactly what I am saying." The Empress, calm and composed, tapped her claws against the armrest of her throne. "You have my attention, Scoutmaster. Explain." Ula nodded, shifting the holographic display. A Tolarian supercarrier appeared once again, its sleek hull gleaming under artificial light. This was the pride of the Empire. It had crushed rebellions, obliterated fleets, and dominated the battlefield for centuries. "This is what we call a supercarrier," Ula said. "It is 700 meters long, covered in stellar steel armor, and carries over 150 strike fighters." The Fleetmaster, still irritated, crossed his arms. "Yes, we know our own ships. Get to the point." Ula barely acknowledged the remark. With a flick of his wrist, the display shifted again. This time, the UHG Cairo appeared. A blocky, heavily reinforced warship with exposed weaponry, massive blast doors, and glowing reactors. Unlike the smooth and symmetrical Tolarian designs, it looked brutal, efficient, and completely unpolished. "This is what we thought was a human supercarrier," Ula continued. "It is smaller than ours, only 550 meters long. However, its armor is just as strong, if not stronger. Its weapons are just as powerful, and its complement of fighters is nearly identical to ours." Brachus waved a hand dismissively. "Then we are evenly matched. We still outnumber them 16 to 1. This only means the fight will be slightly harder. Humans will still lose." The Empress, still tapping her claws, remained silent. Ula sighed and zoomed out of the display. Hundreds of tiny glowing dots filled the screen. "These are all ships like the Cairo. In this fleet alone there are 228. The fleet master's posture stiffened. His confidence wavered. The Empress finally spoke. "I was told humans had only 10 supercarriers." Ula nodded. "That is correct. They do. But these are not what humans call supercarriers." The room fell into dead silence. Brackus leaned forward, his voice quieter now. "Then, what do they call these?" Ula hesitated before answering. "Light assault craft." Brackus stared at the display, his breath slow and unsteady. It was the Empress who finally asked the question that everyone feared. "If these are only light assault craft, then what does a human supercarrier look like?" Ula's mandibles tightened. "That is the part I am afraid to show you." The Empress, for the first time in centuries, felt something she had never experienced before. Doubt. The room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The Empress sat still on her throne, her claws curled tightly around the armrests. Fleetmaster Brackus, once full of confidence, had not said a word since hearing those 3 words, light assault craft. Scoutmaster Ula inhaled sharply, steadying himself. He knew what came next would shake the Empire to its core. He raised a hand, and the holographic display shifted. The screen that once held hundreds of Cairo-class ships zoomed out again. The tiny dots that represented them shrunk, replaced by something larger. Something far larger. Brackus, his voice barely above a whisper, asked, "What are we looking at?" Ula hesitated before answering. "The human home fleet. These ships belong to their defensive forces, stationed around their homeworld." The glowing display pulsed with light, revealing thousands of vessels. Warships stretched across the projection, each one as large as their empire's strongest ships. But these were not the supercarriers. Brackus's mandibles quivered. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to regain composure. You are saying that these ships, these light assault craft, are just their defensive fleet?" Ula nodded. "Correct, Fleetmaster." The Empress exhaled slowly. Her mind raced through the implications. If this was a defensive fleet, then what was humanity truly capable of? But Ula wasn't finished. He zoomed out again. The screen darkened as something massive entered the frame. A shadow moved across the projection, blocking out the light from the nearby star. For a moment, the display dimmed completely, as if a planet had eclipsed the sun. Then, the details sharpened. A superstructure of impossible size took shape before them. Layered armor plating, weapon mounts larger than entire capital ships, and engines that stretched for kilometers. A hushed gasp filled the room. The Empress gripped the railing in front of her, steadying herself. "Is that a station?" she asked, almost hoping for a simple answer. Ula shook his head. "No, Your Majesty. That is a human supercarrier." Brackus stepped back as if the hologram could crush him where he stood. He had spent his entire life leading fleets, commanding warships, and seeing planets fall before him. But this was something else. "This ship is over 30 kilometers long," Ula continued, his voice quieter now. "What we call a supercarrier could fit inside one of its hangars." Brackus's legs nearly gave out beneath him. The Empress tightened her grip on the railing. She had seen countless wars, had ordered entire civilizations to surrender, had ruled for 1,000 years without fear. But now, something unfamiliar crept into her mind. She did not want to admit it. She did not want to say it out loud. But there was no denying the truth. For the first time in her reign, she was afraid. The room had changed. Before, the Tolarian leaders had spoken with certainty. They had been sure of their power, their dominance, their right to rule the stars. Now, silence weighed on them. The Empress had ruled for 1,000 years. She had led countless wars, watched civilizations crumble before her fleets, and forced mighty empires to kneel. Yet here she stood, staring at a human warship so massive it blotted out the light of a star. Fleetmaster Brackus, once the loudest voice in the room, now sat pale and motionless. His claws dug into the arms of his chair. His pride was gone. His confidence was gone. Ula, the only one who had understood the truth from the start, spoke again. "Your Majesty, this is why I said we cannot win." The Empress finally turned to him. Her voice, once so steady, now carried a quiet uncertainty. "Tell me, Scoutmaster, how did we not know? How did we not see the scale of their power?" Ula's mandibles clicked as he collected his thoughts. "Because, Your Majesty, humanity never wanted us to see. The holographic display zoomed in, revealing the smaller ships escorting the supercarrier. They too were massive. Warships armed with enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. Ular continued, "Humans have not spent their existence expanding an empire like we have. They do not conquer, they do not enslave, and they do not claim territory unless forced to. They have remained quiet, unnoticed, not because they are weak, but because they prefer it that way." Brachus finally spoke, his voice shaking. "They could have erased us at any time, if they had chosen to strike first." Ular cut him off. "They did not. That is the difference between us and them. We expand because we believe power is control. But humans, they understand something we never have. Power is patience." The Empress's grip on the railing tightened. "You are telling me that they have had this power all along, and yet they have never used it?" Ular nodded. "Not unless they were given no choice. Humanity has fought wars, yes, but they fight only when threatened. They do not start wars. They finish them." The Fleetmaster exhaled sharply. He felt small, as if the very walls of the throne room were closing in around him. "Their silence was never weakness," Ular said, voice firm. "It was a warning." The Empress turned back to the projection of the massive human fleet hovering around their homeworld. The reality was clear now. The Tolarians had believed themselves to be the unstoppable force in the galaxy, but before them stood something greater. Something older. Something that had chosen to act, not to conquer, not to destroy. And now, for the first time in her long reign, the Empress understood true power. Not in fleets, not in armies, not in war, but in restraint. The throne room was silent. The holographic display still hovered in the air, showing the human supercarrier, a ship so massive it had swallowed the light of a star. The fleet around it, once thought to be humanity's greatest strength, was now revealed to be only a fraction of their true power. The Empress stood unmoving. Her claws gripped the railing before her, but her mind was racing. She had spent 1,000 years making decisions. Wars had been won by her commands, civilizations fallen at her orders, and stars had burned at her command. But this was something new. Scoutmaster Ular's voice broke the silence. "Your Majesty, you must see now. War is not an option. We have only one path forward." Fleetmaster Brachus flinched at those words. His pride demanded that he argue, that he fight, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. He knew the truth. He had seen it with his own eyes. The Empress turned to Ular, her voice quiet but sharp. "If we submit, what will become of us?" Ular hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Humans do not seek to rule. They have no interest in empires like ours. If we stand down, if we show them we are not a threat, they will not act against us." Brachus finally snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "You ask us to surrender? To bow before them like cowards?" Ular's mandibles clicked as he turned to face the Fleetmaster. His voice was cold. "I ask you to survive." Brachus glared at him, his breath heavy, his claws digging into his palms. But he had no argument left. The Empress straightened. Her voice was steady once more. "No empire survives forever. We have ruled these stars for centuries, but we are not the first to do so, and we will not be the last." She looked back at the human fleet, their silent presence a reminder of what awaited if she chose the wrong path. "We will not fight them," she said at last. "We will send emissaries. We will speak with them. We will ensure that we remain untouched." Brachus inhaled sharply but did not argue. The Empress had made her choice. Ular exhaled, relief washing over him. The Empress turned away from the display. "We believed we were the strongest in the galaxy. We were wrong. But strength is not only in weapons. It is in knowing when not to use them." Her gaze sharpened. "Let us hope the humans see us as something worth keeping alive." The decision had been made. The Empire would survive. But for the first time in history, it would survive on humanity's terms. The holographic display faded, but the image of the human fleet remained burned in their minds. The Empress turned away from the projection, her expression unreadable. Her decision had been made, but the weight of it settled heavily upon her. Fleetmaster Brachus stood motionless, his claws clenched at his sides. His pride had been shattered, his certainty broken. He had once believed in the absolute power of the Tolarian Empire. Now, he understood how small they truly were. Scoutmaster Ular took a slow breath. He had spent years gathering this intelligence, but he had never expected it would lead to this moment, the first time in history that the Tolarian Empire chose peace over war. The Empress spoke at last. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Send the message. Inform the humans that we wish to speak, not fight." Bracchus looked up sharply. "And if they refuse?" The Empress turned her gaze to him, cold and unwavering. "Then we pray that they show mercy." The words hung in the air. The mighty Tolarian Empire, which had ruled with strength and domination for centuries, was now at the mercy of a species they had underestimated. Ular stepped forward, activating a transmission. Message sent. A long silence followed. Then, the holographic display flickered. A new image appeared, a human officer, standing aboard one of their ships. He looked calm, his expression unreadable. His eyes, sharp and calculating, studied them through the transmission. And then he smiled. The transmission cut out. Bracchus exhaled, tension draining from his body. He did not know what that smile meant. Was it amusement, pity, or something else entirely? The Empress sat back on her throne. She had led countless wars, but she knew this was her most important battle yet. A battle not fought with weapons but with words. She closed her eyes for a moment before speaking. "Prepare the delegation. We will meet the humans on their terms." Outside the throne room, the stars stretched endlessly, as they always had. The Tolarian Empire still stood, but its future now lay in the hands of a species unlike any they had ever faced. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Empress did not know what would happen next.